What's up, soccer fans, and happy Women's History Month. We hope you've got your cups filled with some tea because we're ready to continue to share with you the herstory of WOSO. My name is Megan Warner, and I'm joined today by my co-host, Harlie Ford. How are you doing today?
Oh, pretty fabulous. I gotta say, I do miss having Katie here, but she's here with us in support, and she's always sipping that tea for us. So, we're gonna do our best to bring you the latest and greatest in women's history. So,
Yeah, I had to stop myself from just naturally saying co-hosts. You both and then being like, wait, no, restart. She's not here today. But yeah, like you said, with us in spirit, she couldn't make the show today, but it happens. Our schedules are crazy. Trying to
yeah.
coordinate is difficult, but we make it happen, we make it work because we want to bring you the latest tea.
Absolutely. And we're going to do it as much as we can and as often as we can. And today we are getting into the second half of her story, as Megan said. And so last time that we saw you guys and you saw us, we were talking about the ban on women's soccer that the British FA imposed in 1921. And after that, there was a half century where there was just women weren't setting a single foot on a single pitch. It was devastating. It was a drought of women's soccer. After we concluded on that note, I did some more digging, and apparently that ban was reflected in several other countries, including Canada, where they were barring female athletes from playing against touring teams, so they weren't allowed to have international competitions. And then also France just refused to recognize female teams altogether. It wasn't that they were explicitly excluding them. It was just I'm not even going to recognize you. I can't exclude something that I don't even believe in. It's it's crazy.
Yeah.
So it wasn't until the late 60s and early 70s that these associations lifted their bans and gave women's soccer a chance for the first time in 50 years.
Yeah, it's pretty insane to think about it. The first Women's World Cup was played in 1970, though it was unsanctioned by FIFA. And in fact, FIFA wouldn't actually sanction women's matches until the 80s. And the first World Cup tied to the organization wasn't played until 1991. This historic event was hosted by Italy and was sponsored by the Federation of Independent European Female Football, or FIEFF for short. So
yeah, I love it's like FIF. It's instead of FIFA, it's FIF.
It's like we're fiefing the game from you guys because you just won't let us play, So for such an event, you would think it would be more possible to find more information about FIF and what they were doing, because they were the reason that women's football was allowed to be played on that international stage and were giving that platform. But as we've kind of found out and discovered through this journey of herstory, there's not a lot of things about women's soccer in history, and so it's really, really vague. But what we do know is that FIF was organized by a group of Italian businessmen during a time when no other group would support the women's game. So huge shout out to those Italians. We thank you and appreciate that you were able to establish FIF, and we are recognizing FIF because nobody else wants to talk about you.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so interesting too because after this event that they put on, that organization just kind of disappeared, and I'm not really sure what it kind of became, if it became anything. Obviously, Italy still has women's soccer, so it must have been put into something else somewhere else. But yeah, again, it's the same thing as when we were talking about those early matches in the 1800s, where it's just we can't even figure out the names of these players that stepped onto that field where tens of thousands of people stormed the pitch trying to get them to stop playing. Anyway, so FIF, again, they organized the first Women's World Cup. It was in 1970, and it represented 7 countries. It was Austria, Denmark, England, West Germany, because at that time, Germany, I believe, was split in twain, Italy, Mexico, and Switzerland. It was originally planned as an 18 tournament, but due to visa issues, Czechoslovakia withdrew. So there were only the 7 teams, but still, I mean, 7 teams after 50 years where women really weren't even playing much soccer to begin with. It's pretty admirable. Again, it wasn't sanctioned by FIFA, but the Italian Football Federation does consider the games played in the tournament as official, at least on the Italian side. And for the 50,000 spectators that ended up attending the final between Italy and Denmark, I think those people found that soccer as real as any men's match.
Yeah, definitely. We're recognizing it here on Our Cup of Tea because it happened, it was legit, and we are thankful to FIFA.
Absolutely. Shout
The
out.
success of that, yeah, definitely. The success of that first tournament led Mexico, whose squad was described as a revelation of a team, to host the second installment of the World Championship. So 6 teams qualified for this event. We had Mexico, Argentina, England, Denmark, France, and Italy. And then there were also 4 other teams who were knocked out during qualifiers in Austria, the Netherlands, Sweden, and Costa Rica. So again, another like good amount of teams like from varying like locations of the world trying to play women's soccer.
Yeah, they want to be involved.
After that positive tournament in Italy. But in Mexico, it was far more difficult. Now, from the outset, the Federation of Mexican Football were seriously opposed to the tournament and were like threatening fines to any team or organization who are allowing the women to just play on their field. So in order to go ahead with this tournament and allow the women to play, the tournament organizers turned to private stadiums and were able to secure 2 locations for this 6-team tournament. I mean, the hoops that people have to jump through, it's just crazy.
Yeah, it's insane. I mean, these women literally just want to play the game that they love, and they've shown that they're able to do it with capable skill. I don't know. It irks me to no end to know that they had to get their little fingers involved into something that just was good, honest fun and was supporting women. And the 2 stadiums that they were able to secure were actually used by the Mexican national team for their own matches during the Men's World Cup. So it was like, it wasn't a private club organization, that was a part of like a league in Mexico. Like these were national stages that these women got to play on simply because, the Federation of Mexican Football opposed them. So it worked in their favor. They found really awesome playing ground.
Take that.
Yeah. So besides the sanctions that were threatened against these women and the clubs that supported them, it wasn't enough. Instead, the organizing committee decided to bend over backwards to market the event as a showcase of femininity, not one of equality. No, we cannot have that. Trust me, these are still women. Don't worry about it, guys. The head organizer even stated that he wanted to capitalize on, this is a quote, the 2 passions of most men around the world, soccer and women. Thank you. Thank you so much.
I have no words. Like the information that Harlie is about to reveal to you is shocking.
Insane. And just as a brief reminder, this is 1970. This is not 1920. This is not 1880. This is 1970. Like many of our listeners were alive during that time. My parents were alive during this time. This is not some distant past. Anyway.
Yeah, we could probably actually potentially find people who will remember this and like be able to speak on it having lived through it.
Yeah, I would love to hear the story of what this looked like, because what they did to make sure that people recognize these women not as athletes, but as the good little girls they're supposed to be, they painted the goals pink. They hired female security officers who were also supposed to dress in pink. And then the players were made to wear tight uniforms, including these classic 70s hot pants, which are like these short shorts, to show off their feminine physiques. Even the locker rooms were redone and they were turned into makeshift beauty salons. So, and again, this is another quote. This happened. The girls can present themselves for interviews and public ceremonies, complete with false lashes, lipstick, and an attractive hairdo. So it was marketed as a beauty contest, and these women were sexually exploited for men to goggle their hot pants and athleticism. it's insane to me.
Yeah, it honestly doesn't sound real. Like, I'm the first person. My cute little microphone, it's pink. I love
It's
pink,
good.
but
I
like,
love pink.
yeah, shout out to my microphone. Side note, my boyfriend got it for me.
Our
Anyway,
mommy coming in close.
but like, I love pink, la la la. But I'm sorry, this is just absolutely ridiculous. Like, you've never heard anything like it. You honestly don't even believe it to be true. It's like some weird, crazy cartoon. Like, it makes me think of in Recess. I don't know if you watched that show on Disney Channel where like
Yeah,
the
yeah,
athletes had like this like tire like little clubhouse in the playground, and like it was totally decked out with just like everything that was quote unquote really girly. It, this just sounds like a cartoon. Like, it does not sound like this actually happened not even that long ago.
yeah. I mean, there aren't really words for it. In some ways, like, I am happy that they were able to put on the event and let women play soccer, but also at what cost? You're demeaning and degrading these women and making them feel like they're not actually doing something profound and athletic. It's like, again, it's just a beauty contest. I don't know. But, for all intents and purposes, the organizing committee got the result that they desired because thousands of people showed up to watch these matches. And when I say thousands, like, it is an insane number. For the final between Denmark and Mexico, there's reported between 90,000 to 110,000 people that showed up for that game. Like,
Wow.
bonkers.
Yeah, that is big crowd numbers.
It's huge. It's huge. Like, I mean, again, the draw, like, we're gonna see these women who got their legs out and they're really pretty because they're super fit, and I don't know. There are even pictures of before the games, the women had to do weigh-ins, and for some reason they were made to do weigh-ins in the street wrapped in a towel. I
Sorry? This is no, literally, like, I'm so speechless,
Yeah.
and like everything about this is just solely like disgusting men trying
Mhm.
to make money off something that should just like girls wanting to play, girls and women wanting to play a sport and having to kind of just deal with that in order to be able to play. Like, fine, like whatever, we'll take the gimmick because at the end of the day, we now have a solid location. We can expose, like, get women's soccer out there and get people to try to take us seriously,
Right.
potentially, if we can use this as the first step. But really, the crowd are not there to take them seriously. It's just it's insane, and you think like, wow, how amazing that the game has come this far,
Yeah,
in the sense
absolutely.
that like we are taken pretty seriously. There's none of that gimmicky type stuff at all. Uh,
Yeah, I think
in
the only
terms of
thing that
creating pink goals, like
I know. The equivalent to it reminds me of, like, the lingerie football league here in
mhm,
America where, like, women have to play in, like, panties to play
right.
tackle football.
Yeah, I think I've like heard minimal about that. I didn't even know if it was real, honestly.
It
Just
is,
like a
it
fantasy.
is,
Is it a fantasy for these people? I don't know.
I don't know, so I mean, like, I can't blame them. Like, fit ladies, I get it, but, like, come on. Anyway.
But yeah, the success of that final game between Denmark and Mexico is gonna draw attention of these people who are thinking, "I can make some money here."
I know,
And so
110,000 people? You're gonna
right,
make some money.
pretty much every money-hungry organization was like, "Hold up a minute. There's something here." So UEFA sought to add a committee for women's football to their organization, and FIFA also started planning for the women's games. So they were interested, but they made some very controversial suggestions, including a smaller pitch for the women, a lighter ball, and shorter matches.
Mm,
Thankfully, these conversations were held by men who really had no interest in what women would want. And, they didn't really go ahead. But Instead, the Asian Ladies Football Confederation led the women's soccer movement, and we are going to give another huge shout out because we believe that they're not recognized enough. And here at our cup of tea, we're going to recognize them because they did some big things for the women's soccer movement.
Yeah, absolutely. So, UEFA and FIFA, they work to have these long conversations about women's soccer and what it's going to look for like for them and the money that they're going to make, but they never like put money where their words were, and they also were not interested in actually what women were going to do. But the ALFC, the Asian Ladies Football Confederation, they put like everything towards what they were saying. We've talked about them before on our cup of tea. We mentioned the Women's Asian Cup before and how it's the oldest women's tournament that is still played today. And now we get to really dive into the history of that tournament because it has done so much for the women's game. It really was where women got to make that international stand that wasn't just about gimmicks and pink goalposts. Like, this was real soccer. So in 1968, the ALFC formed with representatives from Hong Kong, Malaysia, Singapore, and Taiwan. And 7 years later, in 1975, the group organized the first Women's Asian Cup. And they had teams represented from Australia, Singapore, Thailand, Hong Kong, Malaysia, and New Zealand. So, after that, the LFC continued to hold tournaments every 2 years, except from 1983 to 1989, when the group spaced the events to every 3 years. But still, every 2 to 3 years, they were having these international competitions with teams spanning like 2 different continents. It was truly something remarkable and gave women a space to actually inhabit the sport. And it really kept the international women's game afloat and increased the popularity of the game.
Yeah, we talk about it even now. Like, every time there's the Olympics, there's the Women's World Cup, even the She Believes Cup, like whatever it is, it grows the game significantly. It gets people talking about it. It inspires younger players and just lifts the game so much. Like, they're so crucial. And the success of the Women's Asian Cup and the ALFC is what, really started this and kind of showed that this is important and this needs to be done. And so it led to the founding of the Women's World Invitational Tournament in 1978, providing yet another international opportunity for female soccer players. So it was kind of becoming clear that the women's game is not just for, these exhibition games where men are coming trying to watch these ladies run around in not proper attire and just there for all the wrong reasons. These women were playing real football. Like, they were actually there to showcase their ability to enjoy the game. And this started to put significant pressure on FIFA to finally accept women as women footballers, to play the game in what it's supposed to be. None of this extra stuff for women's football and men's football being separate. It's football, and the separation is the gender of the players.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in terms of that, like, FIFA was in a position where they're seeing organizations and countries and teams putting together tournaments that were organized without them, and therefore leaving them out of these profits that they had queued into once before during that game back again, like between Mexico and Denmark. And so, I think they're starting to clue in, like, oh man, this isn't just some act or some play or some like theater troupe traveling around the world. Like, this is something that is legitimate. In 1980, we ended up seeing the establishment of the Mundialito. I do believe I'm saying that right. But this was a tournament that was international, and it was an invitational as well for women's national teams, and became one of the most prestigious football events for women at the time, and even today in the variations that it's become. It lasted for 8 years, and it had 5 organized events, all hosted by Italy. Once again, Italy coming in clutch for the women's game. Shout out. And actually, the Mundialito was the proving grounds for the United States women's national soccer team, because in 1985, that was the debut of their team. That's right. We finally get to welcome the U.S. women's national team into the coverage of her story of women's soccer. Up until that point, women in America had been playing soccer almost exclusively in a school forum, and they had some failed leagues popping up between the 50s and the 70s. And Title IX was a huge deal for women's sports in America, and is the reason soccer started to take a foothold in the collegiate setting. So while women were playing soccer in America, they weren't playing internationally. And the Mundialito was the first time they got to set foot on that stage.
Yeah, which is pretty crazy too, because, we talk about the US being such a pioneering international side, but really they were left out for such a long time on that international stage. But
Yeah.
again, it would be interesting to speak to, you know, somebody who played. I mean, it was interesting when we had Coach Chris on the show talking about her experience playing.
Mhm.
Kind of how was that back then, and talking about that side of things where maybe the level was pretty good. But I mean, it probably must have been, because when they did burst onto that international stage, they were taking the center stage pretty quickly.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. We'll find that there was a little bit of a struggle out the gate, but as we know now, the women's national team is nothing to blink at. They're doing all right for themselves.
Yeah, definitely. And I just want to quickly jump back before we continue on, jump back to Italy.
Yeah.
And I don't know, this is not fact, this is just kind of what I'm gathering, is that the Italian club level for women's soccer is, they're trying to get it to take off, but they haven't really had much success when it comes to the club level of women's soccer, which is really interesting when you think that they really were huge, like,
Advocates.
yeah,
Yeah.
like they were the ones who were like really pushing for women's soccer at the international level, but the club level, they've kind of, lagged behind. Like, let's just talk about Spain, for example, or France. They kind of haven't really had too much of a big say in this conversation that we're having so far, in playing a part for that international level. But you
Right.
look at the club level teams, and they have very successful women's soccer leagues. So that's just kind of an interesting side note.
Yeah, I will say trying to like figure out the grassroots history, or like at least lower league clubs for women's soccer, that is a challenge that I could not even overcome.
Yeah, the amount of leagues that start and then fold, and then, they come back with basically the same name but slightly different.
Mhm.
It's just a challenge. So yeah, I imagine it's extremely
Yeah,
difficult to
yeah. So it
getting
would
it.
be interesting. Like, it's such a good point. Italy really was a driving force for the international stage for women, and I don't know. That is so interesting that they're struggling on that like club home level. So
Yeah.
maybe it'll be something we can explore later on. We can come back, put a pin in it.
Yes. But anyways, to continue. So from 1982 to 1984, the US Soccer Federation started taking the first steps to build a women's national team. But the athletes they selected never actually played together until the stage was set for them to enter the Mundialito. So this story is pretty crazy. So there were 70 women who were brought to try out for the team, and then 17 were selected. I mean, I 17 is such a random number, you
Yeah.
go 16 or 18 or 22, like 17, okay. That's just a small random detail to this story, trust me. So the 17 women that were selected had never really played together, and they were given 1 week to prepare for the Mundialito. So, like, a pretty big deal. At least 17 girls have just been thrown together.
Yeah.
And according to Clement Lisi, I hope I said her name right,
Yeah.
his name right, in the book, The US Women's Soccer Team, An American Success Story, these ladies practiced for 3 days on an unmaintained field with the bare minimum of equipment supplied by the USSF. So, they didn't have much
No.
time,
No time,
resource.
no experience, no equipment.
Yeah, and
Oh, go play against these teams that have been playing for, at least a decade now.
good luck.
Fun.
So they were actually given used uniforms that did not have any lettering on them. And before they left to travel to Italy, they visited a local sporting goods and had their names and numbers ironed on to these used jerseys. And in that tournament, they ended up going 0-3-1 as their record, which is kind of unsurprising. You know, a very difficult situation for these ladies to go and compete against teams that have now kind of gathered a bit of experience under their belt. And these ladies were not set up for success, we'll put it that way.
Yeah, I mean, that just like, again, including this information is important because it just goes to show like it's not an easy road for anyone. You know, you would think the USSF, they want you're playing for club and country and you want to put the best product out in the field, but you're going to make them practice for 3 days in what was quoted to be a cow pasture of a field and not even give them the right equipment to be successful with. Like it just blows my mind. And again, this is in the 80s. We're not this
Right. Yeah, you like that is such corner cutting things that are not difficult. You know, like I know that now we have like a lot better quality fields about. Like if people want to go and train by themselves, they do have access to pretty decent fields. But like I'm sure that with a little bit of extra communication, help, maybe a bit of money, something better could have been done. Like it would not have taken that much to improve that.
Yeah, I mean that's really what it was about. Like at that point, it was about money. I'm certain of it. You know, I mean, football, soccer wasn't essentially a huge sport in America to begin with. You know, and they just allowed women into the game, really. Besides, like the work that they were putting on at a collegiate level. So I don't know. That's something that we still deal with today, and I'm always gonna be heated about it, but it's fine.
Yeah, and then that kind of just sparks on a whole nother conversation, which
Oh
like
my
maybe
gosh.
we'll have another day about like soccer in America because
Yeah.
it's always had such a tough time to come into play because it's deemed not really a quote unquote contact sport in comparison to like American football where these players are like going hard. So they kind of thought like,
Yeah.
oh, like well, okay, we'll let the women play
Yeah,
soccer because
their
like that's
dainty little
fine.
hearts, you know? Anyway, despite the US's struggles, you know, we wanna focus on the successes of the whole kit and caboodle, you know? Then for all intents and purposes, the Mundialito was a massive success. It brought together teams from 9 different countries, from 4 different continents. The tournament finished without a hitch. No one was, like, chased off the field by angry fans seeing women playing soccer, like, it worked. So this paired with the work of the ALFC, and it really kickstarted the first real conversations held with FIFA about the future of women's football. So in 1986, everything really started to change for women's soccer. Ellen Will, I believe that's how you say it, but she's Norwegian, so I might be saying her last name wrong. Anyway, she's considered the mother of contemporary women's football because of what she did in this forum. She was invited to speak at the 45th FIFA Congress, and it was the first time any woman who had ever been invited to do so. Up until that point, all prior meetings before then, all prior congresses, there was never a single woman in that room. This is the first time, and it was about women's football. Like, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Um, she stood in front of these men who had no patience for her, who didn't want to hear what she had to say, and she called them out. She called them out for their lack of respect for the women's game, how they had been pushing out all these documents about the successes of football, and yet only had a half a page about the women's game, and demanded that it was time for a FIFA-sanctioned women's tournament. It had been years, decades, like a century, and
So
it was time.
I read in this article that she had like a script prepared to go out there, and then she received that report of seeing that there was only half a page about women's football, and she was like, well, I'm changing my script and I'm going
Yeah.
out there and I'm heated and I'm going to call these people out and tell them how it is because this is unacceptable. And I just think that she sounds so cool. Like
I know.
she did so much. She even started playing handball. Like she didn't even start with football. And I just think she sounds really cool. And thank you to her because all women needed her to come along and to put these men in their place and tell them, this is how it's going to be and this is what you need to do.
Yeah, it's really I believe I read the same article that you did, and it was almost like a profile of what she had done and the advocacy that she's provided for the women's game. And one thing that I also really loved about it is she talked about her own experiences as a soccer player, and she was like, I really wasn't even that good. I've always been better at talking about soccer than playing it. But apparently, she was like a leading goal scorer for every team she was on. So, Ellen, please give yourself credit.
Yes, right. You can talk it. You can bang those goals in. We're about it. That's what we do.
Yeah. So it was a very harrowing event, standing in front of these people who really didn't want to listen to her. And while just about every single person in that room disagreed with her, there was one person who didn't, and it might have been the most important person because it was the then president of FIFA. I think it's Wow Havlanje. Um, he sided with Helen, and it was amazing. Like this, he actually respected what she had to say and considered it. And even though it took 2 years, following this Congress, his support and the voices of thousands of other women finally got FIFA rolling the ball to launch its first tournament in 1988, which comprised of teams from Australia, Brazil, Canada, China, Czechoslovakia, Ivory Coast, Japan, Netherlands, Norway, Sweden, Thailand, and the United States.
Yeah, so what FIFA saw during this invitational of an amazing group of teams, like from all over the world, is that maybe we should organize a Women's World Cup. So this is considered the first Women's World Cup tournament was 1991. But when we look into this 1991 Women's World Cup tournament, it really wasn't properly branded as a World Cup because FIFA actually let Eminem take the lead on this tournament. So it was called the FIFA World Championship for Women's Football for the M&M's Cup. I'm sorry, but that is the most gimmicky thing. The M&M's Cup, like really, like what? So a long name, a silly name. And a lot of people just were kind of like, seriously? And so if that wasn't enough to sort of remind these women that, you're not good enough you're not worthy enough to have a real World Cup.
You're in the M&M's Cup. You're welcome. Like,
yeah, the teams were almost forced to play with a size 4 ball, and the game times were reduced to 80 minutes in fear of women's health. Now, this is shocking to me. Like, I don't know why. Like, what's 10 minutes and what's that size of the ball difference going to do? Like, it just aggravates me.
Here's something that's really crazy about this. They were so concerned about women's health, but I believe the stat is that it was played in 2 weeks and there were 26 games and 5 of them were double headers. So are you really that worried about women's health? Like
oh my gosh. Like it's just any kind of excuse that I feel like it's just these people wanting to still showcase their power and their hold and just say like we're not taking you that seriously. Like we get it. There might be money available, like we'll work a little bit for it, but like you're not getting the whole thing. And so wherever they could have their hold over these women, they were going to take it. So regardless of whether people really consider that the first Women's World Cup, and despite the just ridiculous restrictions and everything like that, thousands of people actually followed this event and, advocated for women's soccer and said, we're here to stay. We're not going anywhere. And it's about time that you took us seriously. So the women's game continued to grow after that 1991 tournament. And the history then starts to become a lot clearer. And it's not just random articles here and there and different people trying to work it out in books that they've written. It actually becomes quite easy to find what happens next. So Sweden then hosted the second Women's World Cup in 1995. And I know you're all wondering, it was no longer called the M&M's Cup. It was actually the World Cup. Like, we're getting rid of the M&Ms. This is legit now.
It's not. Don't worry. We'll put FIFA on this one. We understand.
We took our time, but you've proved yourselves to us. So then in 1996, women's football was officially introduced as an Olympic sport as well at the Atlanta Games. And then the professional side of the game began to kind of pick up and was taken seriously. And so we had the Japan's L League kicking off in 1989, the Chinese Women's Super League in 1997, the Australian W League in 2008, and then also in that time, we've seen a bunch of different leagues in the United States and the UK. And in 2012, the NWSL was established. You know, there's still a lot more that can be done, but making moves.
Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, to see that from 1991 to 1995, we kind of figure out like where women are supposed to be on the field, and that's with an actual World Cup title and giving them the space to be athletes, not just models. And that's something that I really enjoyed about learning with this history, you know, trying to figure out what struggles we went through to try and get to the point that we're at today, and learning, you know, just how much it took to be taken seriously in the first place is just incredible to me. It's still a really tumultuous road that the women's game is on. I like to think about the 1999 FIFA World Cup in terms of this, because that almost is like the pinnacle of women's soccer. It was a huge event. It was hosted by the US. We won that tournament, and it became the most successfully attended, rated, and viewed tournament the sport had ever seen. It was huge. And those Lady Ballers made history. Every single team that played in that tournament made history. And they showed the world just what the women's game could be. And it kickstarted the road to millions of little girls being able to play the sport today. I think in like America alone, there's like a record of like 4 million little girls that are like there are 4 million women that are like registered as soccer players. Like, that's amazing to me. Where before in like 1920 you had like 2 teams and most of them were inter-squad. Like, that's just insane to me.
Right.
So but since 1999 it's been over 20 years, and for some reason, like, we're still struggling with questions of equality, of physical ability, and trying to figure out whether we're supposed to uplift women as athletes or use them as models for the male gaze. You know, I think about like Sports Illustrated magazines, and you know, it just so yeah. I mean, the history of women's football started in mud. It started with no hope at all, but it also started with women who just refused to be told that they couldn't play. And as long as that ferocity sticks with us, like who we are today and who we will be in the future, the refusal to be told that we are too small, too frail, too dainty to play the sport, the women's game is only going to continue to grow. So, and that's her story, you know,
Yeah.
women's soccer.
I love it. I think it's so important for us to have these conversations and to kind of find out, you know, where did it all start and how did we get to this point? Because there's still sports today that women are finding it difficult to break into and to be taken seriously. You see, like, women's flag football has only recently become a collegiate sport. There's just so much that women have to go through, and it's good to know what happened and to know how you became able to participate in the sport and be thankful and grateful for everything that those ladies went through, because it was a lot. Like,
Yeah, absolutely.
and so I really hope that everybody else enjoyed finding this out. If you didn't know anything before, there's probably people around you that also don't. So, you know, grab a cup of tea and have this discussion with your friends,
Or let us have it with them. We'll take care of it.
yeah, like, send them over to the video, share it, continue the conversation, because it's important to know where you come from. We learn about history in school. to learn about, how our countries were. Well, women's soccer history, it's there and it's important. And we're here to share that with you and to have these conversations. And it's fun. I really enjoyed this month's topic of, it's Women's History Month, and this is what we've dedicated March of Our Cup of Tea for. I know Harlie has been dying to do this series.
A little bit, just like a little bit. Yeah, I mean, I'm so happy like we had the ability to share this insight into the story of women's soccer. It's compelling, it's inspiring, and it makes me want to do more for the game. And I think with Our Cup of Tea, the way that we actively document the history of soccer, the history of women's soccer, I think we're doing a really important thing here. I mean, we cover grassroots soccer, which is something that really has fallen away when I try to find information about these teams. Like, what is the story of grassroots soccer? Like, I don't know the answer to that. Like, that's something that makes me sad. The teams that once were and never will be again. So trying to uplift athletes, uplift these teams that make a difference in their communities and the game, like that's all we are about here on Our Cup of Tea. So I'm really happy that we were able to spend this month talking about something that I'm pretty passionate about.
Yeah, and a huge shout out to Harlie as well, because the amount of research that she has done on this, and also like you giving back to your community. I know you do so much work in the coaching as well. So we gave shout out to FIF and to the Asian Federation, and also I'm giving a shout out to Harlie because thank you for everything that you do for the sport.
You're
Harlie,
gonna make me cry. You're gonna make me cry, Megan.
Okay, that wasn't the point of my shout out. Harlie could cry quite easily. It wasn't that. But no, the amount of work that you do is really important, and Our Cup of Tea appreciates you, and we recognize you, and we're really thankful to have you on the show.
Oh, Megan, I'm so grateful to have you on this show. So sweet.
Now I've got my microphone. I feel like I'm legit on the show.
It's excellent. Well, thank you guys for tuning in and learning more about all things women's soccer. We hope you enjoyed the tea and that you'll join us again when we cover something else, most definitely about women's soccer again. So
very true. We can count on that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Have a good one, guys.
Bye.
Bye.